colleagues to move to the very first segment and deal with two inputs from Namibia and from Mozambique. So Namibia, and this would be Comrade Herbert Jauch, who is a well-known player in the civic society sectors. He also co-edited or co-authored a book on inequalities quite a few years ago, and he is known in the spaces. So for you, Comrade Herbert Jauch, you know, we are aware that there were massive oil discoveries in the northern part of Namibia, particularly the Okavango Delta. What role do you think the locals will play, since they claim that they were not consulted? You know, articulate your fears and Namibians' fears around environment and climate change, really, and anything else really that you want to push the region into in terms of solidarity building with the people of Namibia. So that's over to you, Comrade Herbert Jauch.
Thank you very much, Comrade Joy. And thanks also, Janet, for the first presentation, which puts me a bit on the back foot. I'm nowhere as polished as Janet is, but I'll try to just highlight a few things to the question that you posed. As a background, just to confirm that the COVID crisis in Namibia has now reached unprecedented proportion in terms of spread and death. And for the discussion later on, what is important is to understand how the vaccine apartheid at a global level is biting. Namibia has received through the COVAX facility, where it paid about 400 million Namibia dollars into already 400 million rand equivalent, only received 28,000 doses. In other words, the Namibian state got exactly enough vaccines to vaccinate 14,000 people in total. An absolute catastrophe. So we've been relying on donations from China, another 100,000, and India, 30,000, which would give a total of 3% of the population being vaccinated. We have a situation now where the hospitals had to accommodate people 50% more than capacity. We've got record numbers of deaths right now as the public healthcare system has crumbled. And we are facing a death rate on a daily basis. Because we're a small population, you hear every day about it. And that's important to understand in relation to the global framework that also Janet touched a bit upon, structural adjustment, etc., which Namibia is entering now full force, and a catastrophe is looming there. In economic terms, and that links now to Joy's question about oil in the Okavango Delta. The extractive sector has been left untouched since independence for 31 years in terms of ownership and control. It's multinationals that control it. The state is basically a kind of a minor client that allows them to roam freely as they would want. That has been done with the mining industry in terms of diamonds and uranium for many years, where a shift has happened away from the Western powers like Australian companies, British companies, towards China. China now controls all uranium mines in Namibia. And we've seen new forms of extractivism emerging alongside. The first one was marine phosphate mining, an Omani investor with a local middleman, politically connected, highly corrupt relationships emerging, that wanted to extract phosphate from the seabed. That would have destroyed the whole marine ecosystem, which is one of the richest in the Atlantic Oceans of Namibia. And now, the one that made really global headlines was the oil exploration in the Kavango region of Namibia, which is part of the Okavango Delta going into Botswana. Now, there is a company, Recon Africa, Canadian mining company, that got a license very silently from government, and the local community, people living there, were completely unaware of what happened. And what is important to understand in this context is that these northern regions of Namibia are the only remaining communal lands where throughout the colonial land theft period and genocide period, people were not displaced off the land. So the northern regions were the ones where people could at least remain on the land. At the same time, these are very rural agricultural areas where people are affected severely by poverty, and their livelihood basically depends on access to that land. There was no consultation. The principle of informed prior consent was blatantly violated. And in fact, when local people realized that large tracts of land were cleared for the oil exploration, and they moved to the regional government, they were just told, well, you are too late, that's a done deal. So we see once more where government make deals behind the scenes with foreign companies and allow them then to run roughshod. And that is where, the area where you can see a clear link between extractivism and corruption, because for their shenanigans to continue, these multinational mining companies, they need local politicians to facilitate the process. And we've seen that, of course, over the years with many other companies as well, where the blind hope in business leads to a situation where then these so-called foreign investors are allowed to do basically anything under the sun. And I remember the now Zimbabwean President Mnangagwa saying Zimbabwe is open for business. Now that kind of statement kind of echoes throughout the region, and we see what that means when you're blindly open to business and you are allowed to be trampled upon. Now for us, the question is, how do we change that? And Janet has outlined in terms of going forward what needs to be done. In terms of extractivism, there are a few things which also in Mozambique we've seen very clearly. Number one is local people are in all likelihood not to have any benefits from extractivism at all. In terms of uranium, we've seen that even those who benefited, so to say, in terms of employment creation, they often paid for through their own deaths because of cancer that was caused by the uranium. With the oil, we can see a far more dramatic scenario emerging, and we've had that play out in front of our eyes already in the 1990s, 1980s into 1990s in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, where that time the oil company Shell, with the military dictatorship, kind of pushed out any kind of local resistance, destroyed the ecosystem in the Niger Delta, and destroyed the livelihood of local people. And a very similar scenario is truly threatening right now in the Okavango Delta of Namibia and Botswana, because the governments have given a company a right to explore. And this company, researchers found, has basically no assets. It's almost a shelf company with minimal assets that is taking a huge risk by drilling there, not for themselves, because if things go pear-shaped, they would simply be able to run away, and due to the lack of assets, it will be almost impossible to sue them for whatever damages they leave behind. So what is the risk? It's number one, that local people in those areas lose their livelihood, not only directly through the loss of land, but also through the pollution of their water resources on which they and all life in the region depend. Secondly, it is a direct threat to the whole Okavango Delta ecosystem as a whole. And thus, when you look at the jobs created through mining in the region, it's a minimal number of jobs. The question of unemployment cannot be resolved through mining. So why is it that our governments pin such a high hope on these extractive issues? And the reason is simply because of the high indebtedness. They hope that through export earnings of oil, they would somehow fill the coffers again. Beyond that, there's very little rational explanation why they would want to do that. And of course, and we don't have proof yet, there is high suspicion that there are corrupt relationships between politicians and the oil company at stake here. So what has happened, and that's now the encouraging sign, is that there are new forms of resistance emerging. Particularly young people, there's a Women Leadership Center in Namibia, for example, have taken up that issue to go systematically into it, to meet Parliament, to hold demonstration. And there's now an idea to present a comprehensive study on an alternative, namely going for solar energy in Namibia, as opposed to going for oil. Also in terms of the global, not economic crisis, ecological crisis, which is already at the disaster stage, prescribes basically that we should follow a slogan of leaving the oil in the soil. It makes absolutely no sense to go further in terms of non-renewable, highly polluting energy resources. And an interesting aspect that has not yet been really explored, but that we could look at as a region, but also globally, is a kind of a fund, a climate justice fund, to reward countries like ours in Southern Africa that are adhering to good environmental practice and possibly then decide to leave that oil in the soil in the Okavango region. That through international mechanisms, through UN mechanisms possibly, Namibia gets rewarded for that in terms of financial assistance for alternative energy sources, or financial assistance that can be spread in the form of a basic income grant, which we have already piloted in a village in Namibia, and it was very successful in terms of uplifting living standards and taking people out of poverty. So if we say pollution and the environment, the degradation is a global issue, then countries who deliberately protect the environment and take the climate crisis seriously must be rewarded to some extent. And that is something going forward that one could add to the campaign, so that it's not just a local or a regional campaign, but to say the industrialized countries, the oil-producing countries that have made their billions from oil, but have contributed to the climate crisis that we're facing now, they need to pay those countries that decide to deliberately leave oil in the soil and coal in the hole to protect the environment for everybody. And I think this is a possibility of going forward, because it might not be in Namibia, it's already also in Botswana the case, but also other countries of the region, to say, we will, in terms of climate justice, we will also demand that at international level that be recognized financially. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Comrade Herbert. That was really clear. You know, as we move from Zimbabwe to Namibia, and the message is really loud and clear from you, Comrade Herbert, to say, look, let's save the Okavango Delta, let's save the people of Namibia and climate justice in our lifetime, isn't? And if it's possible to leave the oil in the soil, then why bother? You know, nature and human beings have been living in harmony. But also, you know, the point that you make, which we really want to emphasize here is where governments and multilateral corporations, multinational corporations are in cahoots, in corrupt deals that do not even involve the locals, you know, free, prior, and informed consent. You just see a company in and they're all over disturbing the way of life, environmental degradation, and many of these things, as if companies just go into communities where there are no people, yet companies need people in communities for them to operate. So there we have it, and let's pause it on that moment also and move straight to Mozambique. So thanks so much, Comrade Herbert, and let's move to Mozambique. And my question here to you, Comrade Adriano, our input from Mozambique is going to be driven by Dr. Adriano Nuvunka, who runs the Center for Democracy and Development in Mozambique. And the question really to you is, look, ethnicity and power. Can you unpack really for regional participants the issues around ethnicity, power, and corruption in Mozambique? And in your view, is devolution working in Mozambique? Do you think really the endorsement by SADC yesterday to deploy, you know, a standing force will stop insurgency in Mozambique? What's really happening in Cabo Delgado? People really want to understand, and people want to offer solidarity, but only you really can articulate these issues. So over to you, Comrade Adriano, and you have 10 minutes to share your story with participants here.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to be here this morning with the comrades from the region. I'll start from the end. Well, yesterday, SADC summit endorsed the recommendations of the report of the chairperson of the organ Politics, Defense and Security Cooperation and approved the mandate for SADC standby force mission to the Republic of Mozambique to combat what they call terrorism and acts of violent extremism in Cabo Delgado. Well, the question is, will this stop violent extremism in Cabo Delgado? Not clear. This statement, it comes without any details as to what is going to happen. Where is this standby force is, as far as to our knowledge, at the moment, there is no such force ready to come to Mozambique. Can SADC really deploy such a force to help Mozambique? Does SADC have trained force for that? And also looking at the sort of challenge that Mozambique is facing at the moment. No doubt that Mozambique needs support to contain violent extremists, and that is to be done in parallel with humanitarian assistance and dialogue with all relevant stakeholders, including those who intersect with violent extremists in order to address the root causes of this problem. Our view is that if SADC can deploy such a force, it has to help Mozambique beef up its intelligence capacity. It's more intelligence capacity, which includes the capacity to collect intelligence, as well as the availability of SADC member states to help Mozambique stop any sort of rear-based support that violent extremists can have across the region, including stopping any forms of logistics, including financial support and ammunition, as well as arms. This is the sort of support that is needed from SADC. And next to this, SADC is the right platform for Mozambique to constructively address some of the governance challenges with its neighbors. Look at the challenge in the border with Tanzania. As Mozambique civil society, we acknowledge the improvements in terms of relations between Mozambique and Tanzania since the new president has come to power. So we think that such discussions can take place within the SADC platform. So SADC can offer that. And more importantly, SADC's involvement it empowers the region, including civil society, to have access to information as to what is happening, but also the platform to ask questions and boost accountability, and also to strengthen SADC as a regional bloc and its relationship with the African Union in case SADC cannot, at a certain point in time, deliver what has promised to deliver. So from this perspective, we look at SADC involvement in Northern Cabo Delgado strategic. So again, I would like to stress the issue of governance from SADC, Mozambique, and Mozambique civil society would want to see SADC being the platform, the forum to address Mozambique violence, extremism from a governance perspective and less from a militaristic viewpoint. Having said this, I would like to look at it from the Mozambican perspective. From the governance instruments of SADC, for such deployment, that depends on Mozambique making a formal request to SADC for such deployment. It is not yet clear what it means, this endorsement by the summit yesterday. As it stands, Mozambique has to make a formal request, which did not make or has not yet made such a request. So the coming days are going to be important as to what is really going to happen. On the one hand, will Mozambique activate its right to ask for such deployment? On the one hand. On the other hand, will SADC be ready to intervene, bearing in mind that we are not supporting militarization of Cabo Delgado? We recommend a technical capacity mission that would help Mozambique boost its intelligence in the ways that I have alluded to at the beginning, but more importantly, to be the forum for governance, because we understand, and here we agree with Tanzania, that says dialogue is the way to go about it. And why do we say this? It's because our understanding of the root causes of this problem and the problem. So there are two things. One is what the problem is really, and next to it, the root causes of this problem. Several people have said that Mozambique is facing an international terrorism. While we agree that there might have been hijackings of this problem by international terrorist groups, but we look at it as a domestic problem of related to the failure of governance around extractivism. So it is governance failure linked to grand and small corruption and state capture by powerful people, mainly politically exposed people, including networks of illegal illegal trade that have undermined the state capacity to play its fundamental mandate of protecting local communities, of protecting development in an inclusive way, that has led to an elite-centric extractivism, which is then instrumentalized by elite competition in accessing and controlling resources, that has ignited the problem, which of course over time it has changed its characteristics of being a resource kind of conflict into a more multifaceted type of conflict with elements of clearly of religious dimensions, and also aspects of I would put it this way, elements of terrorism here and there. But more fundamentally, this is not a religious conflict. It's not a religious conflict. It is a conflict triggered by governance failure, more in the form of law and order kind of problem, as elites have been undertaking an exclusionary kind of extractivism in northern Mozambique, having disenfranchised the youth, marginalized the youth, excluded the youth, which then became available to be instrumentalized, of course, with elements of religion, instrumentalized by greed, and that greed, it intersects with organized crime, and that it was boosted by the oil and gas industry in the area. And again, it seems to be towards the ecosystem of governance of the oil and gas. So not targeting the projects per se, not targeting foreigners, but it's around the ecosystem of governance of the oil and gas projects in the area. With this happening, Mozambique has responded relatively late, taken a bit of time to acknowledge the magnitude of the problem. In the beginning, pursuing a solely militaristic approach, only recently combining the military response with socioeconomic, but there is still a big challenge with humanitarian assistance. It is with this, or it is with this happening, that we recommend a SADC participation, which is not aimed at further militarizing. Militarization will benefit, militarization will feed the monster. militarization, it will give the instruments to the very same root causes. What we are saying, what's happening in Cabo Delgado, it is a local problem with international connections, but the root causes are in Cabo Delgado related to governance failure, and a remedy for governance failure. It is governance, it is transparency, it is dialogue, it is accountability. It's a moving away from elite-centric extractivism to a community or a developmental-oriented extractivism. Of course, for that to happen, because of where the problem is at the moment, it requires military stabilization. Therefore, we recommend a SADC short-term participation for that aim, but in the form of law and order, not in the form of fighting a war, which is not the case. It's a law and order problem. But more importantly, SADC, it has to come to Mozambique with a perspective of governance, development, and dialogue in order to be helpful for what is happening in Northern Cabo Delgado and Mozambique in general. I would leave it here for the time being to allow others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Nuvunga, for that. Quite clear. And you've really made it very, very clear that the solution may not actually be another or a military intervention, but an intervention that recognizes, isn't the governance crisis in terms of natural resource management, particularly oil and gas, and what you think must be done as civil society. So let's pause there, comrades and friends, and allow for inputs based on these three presentations from the three countries, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Mozambique. I recognize that there are questions already that are in the chat box. One of them is from Andrew Karamaji that is directed at Prof. Nuvunga. He says, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the root of this so-called violent extremism in Mozambique. I ask because it appears to be a choreographed thing. So really take note of that one, Prof. And then let's have 2 or 3 other questions. You can raise your hand and we recognize you and you tell us where you're from and the question you have and the panelists you want to respond to that question. We have just about 7 minutes to run this session. McDonald, I recognize you. Tembelihle after that. In that order.
Please read.
You can unmute first.
Thank you.
Question for me.
Thank you, Comrade Joy. And thank you, Professor. Unfortunate situation happening there in Mozambique. My question is, following what you have said, and that the SADC has deployed whatever it is called, the military, to help manage the situation in that troubled region. Have you as a nation and even as SADC taken interest in what these so-called peace missions in areas where there is gold, where there are minerals, where there is oil, have been doing, as it is being reported in Congo DR, where even the UN seem to be involved in some of these illegalities. So what measures has the government taken into to ensure that such illegalities don't occur in that troubled area? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade McDonald. Tembelihle?
Thank you, Kule. My question goes to Janet. Really, what is the explanation for not conducting the by-election, since we have seen the political party, particularly ZANU-PF, conducting its DDC elections, and they are busy with the campaign rallies at the current moment. So what is really the standpoint of ZEC? Thank you.
Thank you so much, comrade. Let's have those questions responded to, and then the bulk of the discussions can also happen right at the end. So if Comrade Janet, you are still around, would you love to respond to the question asked? I am not so sure if Comrade Janet is still in the room. If not, let's go straight to Prof. Nuvunga. I think there are questions for you. The questions are the one that I asked and then the one that also was asked by McDonald. I hope you had the question. Over to you, Prof. Prof. Nuvunga, if you are able to unmute. If not, we can pack the questions and proceed with the program. So let's proceed to the next segment. Zimbabwe had already made a presentation, or this is the segment on elections. So now, Comrade McDonald, you asked a question, and we are aware that you know there will be elections in August in your country. Considering that Zambia is going for elections just in the next month or so, is the country prepared for a free and fair election in the view of COVID? And really, what's been going on? Really, what would you want to share with regional participants here around elections, governance, and many of these issues as we try and build solidarity? So your 10 minutes and over to you, Comrade McDonald. I had already indicated that you, if I had not, you run, McDonald runs the GEARS initiative in Zambia, and he is also the chairperson of the Council of NGOs in Zambia. So kindly unmute, time yourself, and go for it for 10 minutes, Comrade McDonald.
Thank you so much. I sent a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll just go straight to the nitty-gritty of my presentation. The first thing is that Zambia is scheduled to conduct the 60th general election. And when we mean general election, we include there are three elections in one, and that is the presidential, district stroke mayoral elections, and ward elections, which are scheduled for August 12th. And this 60th general election is from the 1991. So this general election is unique in the sense that it's being held amidst the fears of coronavirus and the shrinking of democratic space, and also the uneven playing field in the run-up to the elections. The other fears that are characteristic of this election are those of the declaration of a state of emergency, public emergency, due to coronavirus, and the possible postponement of the election, again, due to the same coronavirus and some spats of violence in selected places and districts. But regardless, the date of our general election is entrenched and is declared a public holiday in the Constitution and Article 56, Sub-Article 1 and 2. So it's very difficult at this point in time to change the election date, or indeed to postpone the election date, unless otherwise Parliament, the dissolved Parliament, is reconvened. The context to which this election is going to be held is that there's been the prevalence of political intolerance, restricted assemblies, intimidation, harassment of the media, and the general shrinking civic and democratic space in Zambia due to intolerance, and also the outbreak of the COVID-19 has actually exacerbated the shrinking space. And the soaring cases of COVID-19 has even now impacted negatively on the campaigns. There is also the issue of legal reforms, which have been so limited to accommodate the effects of COVID-19 on elections, and the failure or partial enforcement of the Electoral Code of Conduct, the electoral guidelines on COVID, and the public health guidelines on COVID. There is also the public doubts on the existence of COVID within the country. Why? Is because like now we are in a mourning period, and this mourning period was preceded by the ban on the campaigns, campaign rallies, road shows. But the government has decided to transport the body of our founding president from one province to the other, and people are lining up on the roads to see the body of our departed president. And this is the government that says no road shows, no mass gatherings, but they have allowed this. And this, to some people, they feel maybe government is just lying in order to disadvantage the other opponents, the political opponents. So as of yesterday, the COVID information statistics from the Ministry of Health gives us, yesterday alone, we had about 3,367 positive cases out of the 12,000 or 13,000 tested. So cumulative, we have about 1,037 cases, confirmed cases, and the tests are about 1 million. So this is out of 1 million. And we have had 1,794 deaths. So the number continues to increase according to public information that is given. So what has been the effects of this COVID-19 disruptions on the elections? One, the controversies has erupted on the failure by the Commission to exhaustively discuss, build, and understanding and consensus on electoral issues of interest by the stakeholders. And among the controversial issues that have not been conclusively discussed because of the COVID-19, because meetings cannot be called by the Commission and people cannot meet in that large numbers, is the identification and recruitment of the printer of the ballot papers for the general elections and the deployment of observers to the printing ballots. The Commission has decided to say they will not support any person, independent or NGO or whatever, to go and observe the printing of ballot papers that are going to be done in Dubai. And that those who want to go, they should have a COVID-19 vaccination. They should provide clearance from the country where they are going, and they should have an air ticket before they are given accreditation to go and monitor the printing space, the printing process. Then there's the issue of candidates nomination, which was not conclusively dealt with because at the time people were discussing and meeting, COVID came in, and then the virtual ones could not work very properly. The online pre-registration and verification of voters was not provided for in the law. So the ECZ just went ahead without the law being put in place. There was also a constitution of a technical committee on COVID-19 to come up with the guidelines. And this committee is is a 12-member committee, 11-member committee. 8 of them are government institutions, only 3 are outside government. Then the operating standard operating procedures that were produced by the committee are not convincing to some stakeholders. They feel they were done by government, and this government using their institutions and their appointees on that technical committee, they decided to do to disadvantage others. And the other issue that was not conclusively discussed due to COVID were the issue of the voting of persons in law custody for the first time in our country. So what measures have been put in place? From the technical working group on the COVID, on electoral issues, they have put up rules on social distancing during the electoral management, such as trainings, queuing at polling stations. They have mainstreamed the COVID-19 messages in the information and election education communication materials and publicity and awareness materials. There's also the issue of observance of all health protocols issued by the health experts and institutions by all election officials and stakeholders. There's establishment of surveillance systems and COVID-19 testing of electoral officers before deployment and after deployment. Now, the potential risk areas that have been identified during the campaigns and during the voting are that the COVID-19, there is likely to have high rate of transmission of this disease to when there's person-to-person mass gatherings, and that is why rallies were banned. Then there's also potential transmission on surfaces, and so they feel that when they do campaigns, this is likely to happen. And they say that adults usually attend these meetings, and they feel that COVID usually targets mainly the adults. Then due to inadequate healthcare, they feel that if these campaigns can go the way they are supposed to go, then a lot of people will contact the disease, and the healthcare system will be stretched. So far, there are reports that our health system, the main teaching hospital, receives 60 bodies every day, which are as a result of COVID or associated diseases. So this potential rise has really impacted negatively on the elections. So what are the effects now? The impact on the elections is that because of COVID, the Electoral Commission of Zambia has banned all public rallies and all road shows. Okay, so there's no road shows, there are no public rallies, and they feel that these two are super spreaders of the COVID-19. There has also been restrictions to people who go door to door, that only 3 people per political parties will be allowed to go door to door in the campaigns. If they have a megaphone, only 1 vehicle will be allowed to do so. There is also a ban on media houses from covering any political activities in areas where the ECZ or our Electoral Commission has suspended campaigns for some political parties due to violence. And then we have also the issue of death of candidates due to COVID and other underlying factors. And this has caused for the cancellation of respective elections, leading to fresh nominations and the holding of elections within 30 days as per law established. Now, what has civil society done? Because the COVID has come, the laws have not changed, and ECZ is using police pronouncements to cut out the electoral activities, which is against the law. So the civil society have decided or took a legal suit or took legal suits. Actually, this is the first elections where we have had more than 10 legal suits against the Electoral Commission of Zambia on voter registration due to over the limited time given, on the ban of rallies, and many others have been taken to court. But of course, the court has not been ruling on our favor as civil society for one reason or the other. So there have been continued engagement with ECZ and conducting of public awareness among stakeholders on the effect of COVID-19. There's also adjustment on the planned activities and adopting the virtual meetings for us to continue with our business. In conclusion, the August 12 general election remains a unique election to be held in Zambia, where campaign rallies have been banned. And in some constituents, even the use of media platform is being banned, contrary to the provisions of the Constitution, electoral laws, and codes. As you know, elections is about laws. If you have to talk about fairness, you have to follow the established laws. But in our case, these elections, established laws have been glossed over, and it's now policies, they sit there and just announce we have banned rallies, we have done this, and yet the law still maintains that political parties should freely campaign during the campaign period. There is also COVID-19 has created impunity in our institutions of governance, where instead of following written law enforcement agencies are following institutional police pronouncements without the force of law. So those countries that have not gone into elections, I think they can learn something from Zambia. And one of the lessons that they need to learn is to now start considering revisiting some of the electoral laws to accommodate the effects of COVID-19 than glossing over, because that has got an effect on the fairness and orderliness of the elections. There is also need for those countries that have a provision for by-elections, that during by-election, pilot all the public health or electoral guidelines or standard operating procedures on elections, so that you see how effectively they are working. Is social distance working? Is face mask working? Is regular sanitization working? All those things must be piloted during the by-election. Ensure that extra masks, our experience here in Zambia is that during by-election, some people were detained. Even during voter registration, some people were detained because they didn't have masks. So there's need for you who are not yet in this business to ensure that extra masks are provided for at the polling station or registration center, so that no one is differentiated because they don't have a mask for them to be registered as voters or to participate. And last but not the least, advocate for strengthened consultations before decisions are arrived at by the electoral body on key electoral matters, using alternative platforms, at least for those who are still still have a year or so to do elections. They can learn lessons from us who are found and prepared to carry out this. So in instance, to answer your question, Comrade Joy, we were not prepared to hold elections during a COVID-19. COVID-19 came like a thief in the night, and we were found wanting even the equipment that we needed. Some of them could not come on time because the airline business was down, and so flights could not come into Zambia or come out of Zambia. So that disrupted the electoral calendar, and we had to review it and make it rush so that we can meet the deadline or the date that is entrenched in our constitution, which is the 12th August 2021 for our general election. So I will leave it here and seek for clarifications, if any.
Thank you so much, Comrade MacDonald. Really, really important input there, and quite a lot of lessons to learn. And I do guess that my colleagues are taking note, particularly the three or so points you made right at the end around, the need to ensure that we prepare better. We better prepare for, elections within COVID, because this might be with us for quite some time. So how do we ensure that we also revisit electoral laws to accommodate the impact of COVID during elections, and of course, advocating for strengthened consultations, even using other platforms. So very key there. Let's move, comrades, to the next input, and this takes us to Tanzania. This takes us to Tanzania, and really my colleague there, or our colleague there, Jacqueline Mgani from Mothers of Grace, will give an input on Tanzania. But look, the biggest question that we have on our minds is that, and following the death of former President Magufuli and the coming in of the new president, quite a lot has been happening, and we do have, you know, a lot of questions on our minds, really. And one of the questions would be, we want you to talk about social and political, social and economic reforms post the Magufuli era, and really, do you find any political will towards embracing a transformative agenda in Tanzania? So as you prepare, comrade, I think this is just the right moment for us participants to, especially after the input from Comrade McDonald Chipenzi from Zambia. I'm sure the whole world is aware of Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, who was the founding president of Zambia, who is also, or was a leader of the liberation movement in the region. So we say, may his dear soul rest in peace. But also let me take this opportunity to advise you, my dear comrades, that the movements and the civil society sector also lost a gallant son, who was also the chairperson of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition in South Africa. Reverend Sipho Theys was promoted to glory just this past Saturday. And we say, may his soul rest in peace. May you please allow us just to observe a moment of silence in honor of these two comrades, Reverend Sipho Theys and Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. Just a moment of silence, please. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. May the souls of the departed comrades rest in eternal peace. Let's proceed over to you, comrade from Tanzania. The floor is yours and you have 10 minutes.
Yes, hello. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to you, the mediator. I would just like to introduce myself. My name is Jacqueline Mgani from Tanzania, and I would like to just say that I'm very honored to be the representative from Tanzania when it comes to, Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. So when we come to the topic of discussing power, and you had mentioned, talking from social, political, and economic reform, and how Tanzania is embracing it, we can talk of Magufuli's rule, and a lot of people would say that his rule was, I want to say, inconsiderate compared to the way our current president Samia Suluhu Hassan is handling the situation, especially when it comes to COVID-19 measures and solidarity measures that she's been taking of recent. As we have been seeing, she has been taking efforts in traveling all around and meeting with other member states of the SADC region as well, including communication with Mozambique when we are talking about promoting peace initiatives when it comes to the Cabo Delgado situation, She has been more discussive of opening up talks because she believes that the issue is internal. You know, if I can I have a small presentation here. Let me just share my screen and we can get started.
Just be sure you don't go beyond the 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yes, I understand. It's a very short 5-page PowerPoint.
Thanks, Comrade Jackie.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Hold on. Oh, it says you've disabled screen sharing.
Yeah, organizers kindly enable. Meanwhile, you could already start talking to it.
Right, okay. As we all know, the late President John Pombe Magufuli was the predecessor for our current chairperson, who is for the SADC region. And there was a short discussion or argument of the way he had to his approaches for COVID-19 measures, which in turn, I think, created a separation per se for solidarity, because neighboring states and SADC region states had been taking COVID-19 measurements. Meanwhile, Tanzania was looked as a state which is not necessarily taking the situation seriously. And so when we're talking about social, political, economic reforms in terms of COVID-19, people were seeing Magufuli as going against everything that would support COVID initiatives towards, you know, how do I say, towards combating the situation. So, you know, I feel like there was a necessity of creating a method that would implement economic growth, better infrastructure and social changes within Tanzania. But he was not very open to communication to discuss these things, whereby Samia Suluhu is opening up collaborative efforts. She has been even going to Kenya and opening up, you know, collaboration again to open trade, whereas Magufuli would, because he just believed in opening state during this situation and causing the effect to grow and spread, and not embracing I want to say regional integration in collaborating with other states when it comes to fighting the disease. And people would say that he was on a corona power trip. So then we have Samia Suluhu Hassan, who is taking efforts and who is taking measurements and who is going by example by showing us that in order to achieve better reforms politically, socially, but also achieving growth or how do I say this? Or achieving, let me say, reform in this situation where Magufuli had left everything up in arms, leaving Mama Samia to kind of come in and bring in a different approach, which is more inclusive and more considerate of neighboring states. As the person for the speaker from Zambia had mentioned, that the other SADC region states have been having increases in cases of corona. Like Zambia has had over 100,000 cases, and Mozambique has had over 70,000 cases, and Lesotho has been having over 11,000 cases. But Tanzania, even when all the states were closed and we were having a border trade crisis, Magufuli still kind of stood in his people would say tyranny. Samia, I think, is opening up a more subtle approach by showing people that you still can take COVID measurements, and you still can have a social, political, and economic reform without having such an aggressive take to the matter. And she's doing this by opening up a conversation of solidarity when it comes to cross-border governance issues. And I feel like SADC can be involved in this because we are the open communication channel that will help cross-border governance, as we are, different member states with different issues, not only corona, but we can talk things like sexual based gender violence. We can talk about health reform. We can talk about regional integration. We can talk about resource management, things like food supplies, medical supplies, gas, oil, imported goods, of which, under Magufuli's rule, these things would have been very hard to manage, because he created sort of a gap between a connection in the SADC region states, where all of us should come together in solidarity to work together towards combating all these things. And so Mama Samia would come in, and she is diligently building regional integrations and restoring relationships. We can talk of just the recent meeting she had in Kenya with the president, and she was able to open back up trade. So if you look at easy things like trade, for example, we can talk about the types of resources that Kenya has that we could not receive because of the way Magufuli was using his power, his strength, or his position to fight COVID, which was restricting the rest of the SADC region or the East African community or other organizations to work. Yes. Okay, sorry. To work with us, in solidarity in order to combat hunger or injustification during this lockdown. I would say Mama Samia's approach is creating solidarity. It's compromising. It's opening up conversation. Like I've mentioned before, when she was talking to Mozambique, and she had said she's not supportive of opening up something for war, but she will support an open communication. And so if we review what the SADC theme was last year, when we were talking about peace building and security, promoting resilience and people-to-people communication, we feel that Tanzania feels like Mama Samia or President Samia has a more unique approach or inviting approach that will provide communication and strength between all member states of the SADC regions, whereby the former late president Magufuli would close those gaps using his approach. And she does this by example, by showing us, okay, so you can wear a corona mask, or you can take these measures without, offending other states which are being affected by the disease. And so she has also discussed about looking and researching into the statistics of how Corona has been affecting us. Have they been hiding statistics? What are they doing to show us these statistics? So
Thanks, if you can wind up.
Okay. So in closing, I just want to say, in creating solidarity within the SADC region, I feel Mama Samia has a very appropriate approach to this conversation. And I would just like to say that I am very honored to be the Tanzanian representative for this, for the second time, actually. And maybe it's a woman's approach, as some would say, that Mama Samia has a female approach to this situation. But there are some necessities to how Magufuli was running things, and that's how things started moving. Like our infrastructure did change somehow when Magufuli was in rule. So I thank you very much, everyone. I'm hoping it was a little informative. It was a quick thing. Yes. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, Jackie, for that input. Really appreciate it. And you bring in a very different angle where, leaders can also be the ones leading the way in terms of solidarity and in terms of engagement with other countries. And the message being also very loud that it's a breath of fresh air having a president and the great work that's happening there. So if really civil society feels things are going in the right direction, great stuff. Would all love to learn from Tanzania and keep building each other in terms of solidarity. So thank you so much, comrade. And let's quickly move to the next presentation. And just to let you know, comrades, that let's remain on this call. Let's remain engaged. Our intention is not to go beyond 1 o'clock. So we are left with about an hour. If we can finish earlier, the better. But let me just try and get this segment over before we go into a bit of questions and answers. And please keep your questions coming in the chat box. We will also direct them to the right persons when the opportunity comes. So please, let's keep engaged. Okay, from Tanzania, we move to Malawi. Malawi, the biggest question that we have is, are the new brooms sweeping well, dealing with corruption? You had elections, Malawi had elections amidst COVID. We learned one or two things, and amidst COVID, you actually changed from, one governing party to the other, even under those circumstances. And here we are, we hear a lot about the new president, but we also hear a lot about what could be happening better in your country. So the question is, what's happening to corruption? What's happening to, good governance? Are we in the right direction? And in less than 10 minutes or 10 minutes or so, Comrade Tadala Chikwezule, who works with the Women's Lawyers Association of Malawi, will take us through that input. So 10 minutes or so, Comrade, if you can come through. Over to you.
Hello, my apologies, I was muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, all right. So I'll quickly do my presentation because I have to rush into another meeting. But then the key area of interest for Malawi has been stated is whether the new brooms are sweeping well or not. And from the perspective of my paper, what I decided to do was to write about the rule of law in Malawi, whether the rule of law is actually being complied with or not. So the areas that I've looked at essentially is the right to vote and the right to access to information, the right, the promotion of gender equality, the right to peaceful assembly, and the commitment to deal with corruption. So you will notice that I think my paper will be shared. I also shared a PowerPoint presentation with the organizers. You notice that, first of all, pertaining to the right to, I would say that, okay, I will take you back. So in Malawi, our elections were nullified in through a court process, and we ended up having new presidential elections in June. Actually, it was on 23rd June, 2020. So we've just clocked a year. And after those elections, we've had by-elections. So the nullification of those elections was because...
Tandala, you are coming very low. I can't hear you well.
Oh, okay, sorry. So can you hear me from there?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So I was saying that we had the elections in June 2020, on the 23rd of June. So as of last year, as of yesterday, we've just clocked a year with the new government. And these elections was because of the result of nullified elections that were nullified through a constitutional court in February 2020. So now we have a new government, and the issue that I'm looking at is whether the rule of law is being abided by. And I look at the issues pertaining to the right to vote, right to information, promotion of gender equality, and also the right to assembly, and the dealing with corruption. So first of all, I think we all understand what the rule of law is, so I will not go further into that. But then pertaining to the right to vote, which had led to the nullification of the elections in June 2020, we've seen that the by-elections have been conducted with a great standard and professionalism. Initially, there had been a lot of issues of TPEX and what have you. That is no longer there. So I would say that on that one, it seems that we're doing quite well. And then on the issue of the right to access to information, we noted, I would say that the new government came in with much vigor on that one. Well, what they did is a law which was not being operational as of 2017, the Access to Information Bill, was actually operationalized in September 2020. And because of making it operational in September 2020, it meant it was quite a move, because 3 years had passed without it being operational, though it was promulgated. So a lot of people have actually used it, institutions and private individuals, which is a good thing. And that's the result that brought about a national audit of COVID-19 funds that were utilized. And in the audit, it was found that those funds were actually misappropriated. So bringing it out in the public was because of that act. But then when other people went ahead to ask for further information, there was another tranche released of 17 billion. That information was not forthcoming. Recently, the newspapers have said the reason they have not brought out that information is because that money was not utilized or disbursed. Now, I think that seems to be like, oh yes, we'll give you information, maybe not, we'll decide on what. So we're still watching. The other thing is issue of promotion of gender equality. I would say that we are also on a 50-50 kind of basis. Why do I say that? The Gender Equality Act clearly says that there has to be a 60-40 representation in public service and appointment of either gender. But then what we noted was when the ministers were appointed, it was only 38% that were female, not even reaching the minimum of the 40%. When the boards and parastatals were set up, the 40% was not even attained. Most boards that were looked at as very competitive did not have women in there, and only 11% were being led by women. Again, there was an outcry on that. However, when the judiciary was being appointed, there was a 50-50 compliance with the Gender Equality Act, in that 50% of either gender was appointed. And even further, the Malawi Human Rights Commission has gone further to ensure that they have a database of women professionals, and now they're compiling that. On the other side, I'll talk about the right to demonstrate. So we do have that right in our law, in our constitution, but then there've been times when it has been curtailed or stalled. And resultantly, there's been a lot of crashes. But then with this new government, they've been tolerant to demonstrations. However, this month in June, when one of the organizations that is now seen to be proactive demonstrating, CICED, when they wanted to demonstrate on land rights, they were not given authorization on the basis that the matter was in court and there was another prior demonstration that had taken place. So again, there we see that we're not quite sure. Are we going there? Are we getting there? Can we demonstrate or not? Will they decide on how you can demonstrate or not? So that's also another area that I've looked at. The other issue I've looked at is corruption. When they came in, it showed that they were quite aggressive in handling corruption. But then over time, there was a bit of slowing down. Even the HRDC, Human Rights Defenders Coalition, they issued a paper after 6 months of the new government decrying the non-push against corruption. And then I think coming to now, we see that there've been a lot of things that have involved, that have shown as if there's been corruption, whether it's Covid-19 management, fund management. There was an oil supply impasse between NOCMA and MERA. Those are government institutions. And people were looking at the way the issue was being looked at, or the general perception of public was that there were some elements of corruption. So when the new SCB director, who was the former ombudsperson, came in, she made sure she suspended that oil deal, oil supply and procurement. The problem is that if there's no resolution to the issues that were raised, there can be a fuel shortage crisis in Malawi. Fortunately, recently, last week, the president actually took up a step to meet both entities, the leadership of both entities, to see whether they can resolve the issues they are on. So in my conclusion, my apologies, I've had to be fast because I have to rush into the other meeting. But in my conclusion, looking at those things that I've highlighted, there seems to be a bit of political will to change, but there's still elements or areas that need improvement and change. And as the question has come, the new brooms sweeping well? My response has been that they are trying, but whether we have to celebrate or not, I would say, I think let's wait and see. They still have 4 years. Let's paint the celebrations to another time. I thank you. I'll end there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade, for that input. Really, really appreciated. Just taking us through the progressive changes in Malawi. And the lesson we learn really is that it is possible for the situation to improve, but we need to keep pushing, for gender equality and also ensuring that the gains made, the democratic gains made, are not reversed. So there is really no need for civil society to then lie back and say we are there, because it takes continuous pushback for these things to be granted. So thanks so much, Comrade, and that's really appreciated. The last in this segment would be the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we have Comrade Chivanku to take us through the situation in the DRC. And really, I do think that there is a lot that's been happening in the region, including the DRC, but the region really would want to be informed around the situation in the DRC and how the region could also come in and assist. So without wasting much time, let me hand over to Comrade Pierre Chivanku, and I know there may be need for translation, so I do hope that that is adequately organized. So over to you, Comrade.
Thank you so much, Comrade. Je m'appelle Saint-Pierre Chibangu.
Mon nom c'est Saint-Pierre Chibangu.
Je travaille pour Droits humains sans frontières à Kinshasa.
Vous travaillez pour, pardon?
Je travaille pour Droits humains sans frontières à Kinshasa.
He works for Droits humains sans frontières in Kinshasa. It's an NGO.
Il nous a été demandé dans le cadre de ces échanges de parler des élections et des réformes électorales en République démocratique du Congo.
I was invited to speak about electoral reforms in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Alors, dans le cadre de ces sujets, nous avons tenu pour échanger avec vous sur les thèmes suivants.
I would like to share with you the following theme.
Regard sur les réformes électorales en RDC et perspectives pour 2023.
A look on electoral reform in the DRC and the perspective for 2023, so the annual elections in the DRC.
Comme vous le savez, chers camarades, la question,
comrade,
la question des réformes électorales en RDC est une question très cruciale. Et actuellement,
the question of electoral reform in the DRC is very crucial, and for now,
et actuellement, cette question fait l'objet des débats entre tous les acteurs politiques, ceux de la société civile et consorts.
And this question of reform, electoral reform, is on debate currently by different forces in the country, the civil society, political actors, and so on.
Mais en fonction de son caractère très politique,
because of its political character,
tous les acteurs politiques engagés dans cette matière ou dans ce domaine ne se sont pas encore mis d'accord.
All political actors involved in this matter are not yet, haven't agreed yet. They still have to come to a common understanding or a common ground for the electoral reforms.
Je disais que tout le monde n'est pas d'accord pour entamer un processus de réforme en cette période préélectorale.
I said all actors haven't agreed yet to an electoral reform for this pre-electoral period.
Pour votre information,
For your information,
depuis l'indépendance de la République démocratique du Congo,
since the independence of the Democratic Republic of Congo,
tous les régimes politiques qui se sont succédés ont retenu à leur agenda l'organisation des élections libres, transparentes et démocratiques.
est-ce que vous pouvez répéter?
Je disais que depuis l'indépendance de la RDC, tous les régimes politiques qui se sont succédés au pouvoir ont retenu à leur agenda l'organisation des élections pluralistes, libres, transparentes et démocratiques.
Since the independence of the DRC in 1960, all political regimes that have come to power, they agreed to a democratic election and an accountable electoral system.
Pour parler des élections les plus récentes,
if I can speak about the most recent elections,
en 2006, en 2011 et 2018, les élections ont eu lieu sur l'ensemble du territoire national.
In 2006, 2011, 2018, there were general elections in the whole country, so in the whole DRC.
Mais ces élections ont abouti à des frustrations qui n'ont pas satisfait tous les candidats.
But these elections ended up in a frustration that didn't bring peace or didn't bring an agreement or a common understanding to all political actors.
Pour résoudre ainsi la crise de légitimité,
to resolve the legitimacy crisis,
les acteurs politiques et ceux de la société civile ont toujours envisagé des réformes électorales.
Political actors and civil society have always opted, or they always campaigning for an electoral reform.
Comme vous le savez aussi,
as you know as well,
en 1996 et entre 1996 et 2001,
between 1996 and 2001,
la République démocratique du Congo s'est retrouvée dans un conflit politico-militaire.
The Democratic Republic of Congo found itself in a political and military conflict.
Ce conflit a abouti à des négociations politiques qui se sont déroulées en Zambie, à Lusaka.
And this conflict ended up to a negotiation that took place in Lusaka, what's called currently the Lusaka Accord.
Les négociations ont abouti également à un dialogue intercongolais à Sun City, en Afrique du Sud.
An inter-Congolese dialogue was also launched to resolve the conflict in South Africa at Sun City.
Lors de ces dialogues à Sun City, les acteurs politiques ont mis en place une constitution de transition.
During, at the end of the inter-Congolese dialogue at Sun City in South Africa, political actors, they came up with a new constitution.
Et cette constitution de transition avait pour objectif d'organiser ou d'amener le pays vers des élections libres, transparentes et démocratiques à tous les niveaux.
The aim of this transitional constitution was to lead the country to a democratic and accountable election.
Les élections étaient consensuelles et fondatrices d'un nouvel ordre politique en République démocratique du Congo.
An election organized through a consensus can lead to a stability to a country, and this should be the case of the DRC as well.
Lors de ces dialogues de Sun City, des acteurs politiques avaient également jugé de prendre ou de mettre en place une commission nationale indépendante tendant ou chargée à organiser des élections.
At the end of the inter-Congolese dialogue at Sun City in South Africa, political actors resolved to put in place an electoral commission, a free electoral commission that could lead the country to a free and fair election.
Et cette commission est dotée d'une personnalité juridique, en d'autres termes, d'une autonomie.
And this commission is autonomous. It means it's a legal commission that was put into place after Sun City.
En ce qui concerne les réformes électorales en RDC,
as far as electoral reforms are concerned in the DRC,
nous avons observé que la question est très permanente parce que à chaque cycle électoral, la question des réformes se pose.
We notice that this question is just lingering around after each election, after the frustrations brought by each election. This question of electoral reforms come to surface over and over.
La réponse à cette situation des réformes permanentes réside dans ce que depuis 2006, le cycle électoral n'a pas permis de mettre fin à la crise de légitimité.
And the challenge is that regardless the 3 past elections that were hosted, the legitimacy crisis still remains. So these were not satisfactory elections at all.
Près de 20 ans après, le pays se trouve toujours en quête de mécanismes pouvant garantir des élections crédibles et démocratiques acceptées par tous.
2 decades later, the country is still in need of a structure or a system that can lead to a free and fair election.
Au jour d'aujourd'hui, actuellement,
for the time being,
les voix s'élèvent pour que l'organisation des élections soit
I've lost him. I've lost him.
We seem to have lost him, but I also hope he was concluding.
libre à travers une CENI, une commission. Hello?
Yeah, on vous avait perdu, vous êtes rentré. Si vous pouvez répéter les dernières phrases là.
Ok, je disais que au jour d'aujourd'hui,
yeah, to date or for the time being,
les voix s'élèvent pour que la commission nationale indépendante chargée d'organiser des élections soit dépolitisée.
There are voices campaigning for an electoral commission that is apolitical, that doesn't suffer from political influences.
Malheureusement, pour les acteurs de la société civile que nous sommes,
unfortunately for us, actors from the civil society,
le 4 juin dernier, une nouvelle loi organique portant une réforme de la CENI a été adoptée par le Parlement congolais.
On the 4th of June this year, a new law for an electoral reform was voted at the national parliament.
Comrade, can you conclude?
Yes.
Conclude, thank you.
Si vous pouvez conclure, vous n'avez plus assez de temps.
D'accord, je t'en vers la conclusion.
Ok.
Cette loi qui détermine le nombre de membres de la CENI accorde à la société civile 4 membres sur 15.
This law that determines the number of actors or the members of the Electoral Commission grant to the civil society 4 members amongst the 15 total of members in the commission.
Voilà pourquoi nous, acteurs de la société civile, nous suggérons,
That's why, as actors from the civil society, we suggest that
comme on n'a pas pu obtenir la dépolitisation de la CENI,
as we didn't succeed to make the Electoral Commission apolitical or free from political influences,
il y ait des garde-fous, notamment pendant les opérations électorales d'enrôlement.
there must be some safeguards during the electoral time. For example, this, the registration
Les opérations d'enrôlement
of voters. Identification de quoi, pardon? Identification de quoi?
Des électeurs.
The identification of voters.
Et de continuer à former les masses.
And the education of masses towards the electoral system.
Afin de participer à la vie politique de la nation. Merci.
So that the masses can also participate to the political affairs of the country. Thank you. I think he has ended. Vous avez fini?
Oui, j'ai fini.
Vous avez fini? Okay.
Oui, oui.
That's the conclusion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, comrade. And the message is also quite loud and clear. It's been a long road to electoral reforms in the DRC, and the struggle continues, and therefore the region must continue to offer solidarity.
Votre message
in the
est
DRC.
très clair. Notre rôle, c'est de vous offrir la solidarité en tant que société civile de la RDC.
Yes. Thank you so much.
I have interpreted what you said. Merci
okay,
beaucoup.
so cognizant of our time, let's just move straight to the next input, Lesotho. There have been coups, splits, attempts at reforms, security sector reforms, and many of these things. We also always see the military having a hand in politics in Lesotho, and quite a lot is happening there in terms of the search for democracy and governance. So, Comrade Tsosani from the Transformation Resource Center, the delegates here would love to hear from you in about 10 or less minutes what's really happening in Lesotho, and how can the region be useful to you? So over to you.
Thank you very much, Ndate. I would like to share my screen with you. I'd like to share my screen.
Okay, Ndate, I'm sure the hosts are organizing that you get the rights to share your screen. Please, hosts, kindly enable Ndate Tsosani to share his screen. Meanwhile, as that is happening, if you are able just to begin to give us teasers about the situation there.
Thank you very much, Ndate. I think we should start where we should highlight that since independence.
The Melanda, you are coming, your audibility is very low.
Oh, let me do this. How is it now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, it's much better. Let's get on with it.
Okay. Can I share my screen now?
Please do try. I hope you have that function now.
Okay. I'm still not able, but it does not matter. I will just present.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I should indicate that actually, since independence, we've had a repeated bounds of political instability, including but not limited to coups. We've had violent unrest, disputed elections, and all major political ranges of instability in the country and in the political atmosphere from 1970 through 1986, 1994, 1998, 2007, 2014, 2015, and 2017, they were brought about by the use of the armed forces. As such, we should note that we have a very active military and political upheavals have been the order of the day. So just to make a recap on the introduction of what we have on splits, we should indicate that the advent of the era of hung parliaments started in 2012, and it has led to a phenomenon of unstable coalition governments, which has changed the dynamics of Lesotho's constitutional democracy. This era came as a result of the splits and fragmentation of the ruling parties. On coups, we've just touched on it. So I think we can pass. So one other thing that is still ongoing, we have the reforms process that are ongoing, which followed the August 2014 attempted coup, and which was very bloody. And after that, SADC put pressure on the government of Lesotho to undertake constitutional, security sector, and government reforms. However, we have to note that the reforms are constantly threatened by the volatile coalition politics resulting from factional infighting within governing parties. So we pass that and we start working on our coups. We find that the military has been always at the center. The role of the military in 1970, when we first had the second elections we had in the country, the military actually acted as a guarantor of civilian power under conditions of civilian dictatorship, and politicians used the military to ensure their survival. And that resulted in politicization of the army. So between 1970 and 1986, we had a one-party rule. So in 1986, we saw the military overthrew that government, and the military was backed by South Africa, and they overthrew the government, and after that, they signed the water deal. But that is not the subject of the day. So between 1983, another coup within the junta itself inaugurated another a colonel in the army. And in 1993, then we returned to constitutional democracy. So from 1993, we saw the king himself staging a coup following a diplomatic and mostly inept and careless actions of the PCP government, which came to power after the first democratic elections in 1993 on the question of the reinstatement of his father as the king. And it even culminated in various court cases, in a court case, in fact. And another attempted coup that we saw was in 1998, where the king was urged to take unconstitutional initiative to dissolve parliament, install a government of national unity. And that coup was facilitated by junior officers in the army. So the next one we had, which is the last one we had, was the 30th August 2014, where we saw elements loyal to the then ousted Lieutenant General Kamudi staged a coup which led to the then Prime Minister Thabane and his fellow leaders of coalition partners fleeing to South Africa. I should note that the high treason case is still ongoing in the courts of Lesotho, and because it involves politicians, it is very much dragging. So that is that. So the second part that I would like to deal with now is the intra-party conflicts, which has led to the splits now that we have concluded on the coups. We actually had the first intra-party conflict in 1997, where the ruling party did not overcome a protracted inter-party conflict, and they formed a splinter party that even seized the government. Some people even call it unconstitutional because they did it in parliament. It was just a new party, and the speaker declared it as the new government. That party, which was a very large party, which won 79 constituencies out of 80 in 1998, it split in 1992, it split again in 2006, and then it's finally, a nail was put on its casket in 2012 when its leader walked out to form another party which also took government. And in 2012, then we headed for elections. After the 2012 elections, then the elections actually were a direct reflection of the splits, and we experienced our first hung parliament, which paved a way for the first coalition government. So that coalition government, it fell in 2015. Then we had another election. We had another coalition government. It fell in 2017, snap elections. And then we have the current government, but which also went through some difficulties. So yes, the ruling party in 2016, the party that was ruling also split, and it led to the fall of the government. And now we also had the ruling party from 2017. It was engaged in a very protracted infighting where the leader of the political party tried to make it hard for his deputy to get into office. And as we all know, in 2021, in the last 2 months, that party split, the ABC party split, and the deputy leader of the ruling party, the larger party in the coalition government, he formed a splinter party, and he even threatened overthrowing the government.
I seem to have lost Ntate. Can anyone confirm if they can still hear?
I'm back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And you can then conclude, please. Yes.
So we are heading straight to the conclusion. We have the reforms which are ongoing, which are also being threatened by the coalition political arena, which is very unstable. We have the political elites who are not willing to compromise and work together towards a common vision for Lesotho. We still have the government, which is undermining the NRA, the National Reforms Authority, which was tasked with overseeing the reforms process. So with that said, I think we can head to the conclusion, and we pave the way forward. One of the problems that we've had over the years is that we have a very active military, which is very political. So a way forward would be for us to militarize the politics. And then we should also be expediting the national reforms. We should be creating strong institutional frameworks, which is still ongoing and it is being overseen by NRA. NRA is also overseeing the amendment of the laws to make sure that the military does not intervene in internal affairs. We should also be ensuring the rule of law. I think it is worth noting that at this point in time, the government has put before Parliament a national, it's the Transitional Justice Commission. It's called the National Peace and Unity Bill, which is going to, in which they intend to form a truth commission, and there has not been any consultations, and it is being imposed on the people, and the civil society is opposing that move vehemently. And we also should be capacitating the judiciary to ensure judicial independence and to make sure that the judiciary oversees and actually checks the other two branches, because at the moment, just a few months back, we were recruiting the judges, but because of the funding, that process stopped, and the Law Society is still trying to figure a way to make the courts running again. One other thing, which is the last one, is that we've been advocating for political parties to have conflict resolution mechanisms to make sure that differences within a party does not lead to any split, but that conflict should be resolved amicably. With that said, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I would welcome questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Ntate, for that powerful input. And quite clearly, again, the message is clear. Really, we need to demilitarize the political space. We really need to keep doing what we can do to keep the military out of civilian politics. That is desirable. And we really also need to create strong institutions, review national laws. The judiciary must be reformed and have conflict resolution mechanisms that also ensure we keep promoting multi-party democracy in our countries. So that was quite clear, and thanks a lot for that, Ntate. Please keep your questions coming in the chat box, and I'm sure you will get questions if there are any once we reach the tail end of our program. We are almost there. So thank you so much, Ntate, for your input. I guess...
thank you very much, Ntate.
Thank you so much. I guess it's the right time to cross over to Eswatini. Quite a lot has been happening over the years in Eswatini, and we know, is the, the last remaining absolute monarchy, and for quite a long time, political parties were banned. The struggle has really been real, and we've talked about the shrinking of the political space and all, and we've come in and out of this space to talk about these issues and continued to offer solidarity to comrades in Eswatini. And perhaps the question now is, we would really love to get a sense on how the situation might be at the moment, and again, what we could do as citizens from SADC to keep offering solidarity to the comrades from Eswatini. And we have none other than Comrade Thabo Masuku, who heads the Foundation for Social and Economic Justice in Eswatini, to take us through the Eswatini input in just about 10 on the key points. Over to you, Comrade Thabo.
Thank you, Comrade Joy, and good afternoon, comrades. Hopefully, I'm audible enough.
Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Am I audible enough?
Yes, you are.
Thanks, comrade. Okay. Comrades. Ours is just an update on the current situation in Swaziland. My task was to update the conference on police brutality and under the COVID-19 situation. Comrades, one should, give a historical background of the issue of police brutality in Swaziland, and as informed by the political environment. And also, I will also highlight the current cases of police brutality that we are facing in the face of the lockdown regulations. But also, I want to highlight the rampant corruption that we are seeing during the COVID-19 period. Comrades, as Comrade Joy has highlighted, Eswatini still remains the last absolute monarchy in Africa. We got independence in 1968, and the political parties were at the forefront in waging the struggle for independence. And it happened that in 1973, the political parties on 12 April 1973 were banned by the then King Sobhuza II by necessary intent, meaning that he is taking over the three arms of government and powers on appointments to key government positions rested with the king, which is even now after the constitution, because by then we didn't have a constitution. Even now, after we have the constitution, the status quo still remains the same. So, comrades, that's in a nutshell the background where we are coming from, and that meant that in the banishing of political parties, that meant that the king now is the absolute monarch, and he's above the constitution of the country, which means you cannot be held accountable for any actions in court because he's above the supreme law of the land. Now, that means also the same person who is now the supreme appointing authority of the prime minister, of the chief justice, of the chairperson of key commissions in the country is appointed by the same person, but that person is above the constitution of the land. We have seen in protest for that status quo, the introduction of the 60-day detention period without trial, where we have seen a lot of activists and human rights defenders being arrested and put in detention for 60 days without trial. We have seen in the 1996 SFTU strike, which is the trade union movement in the country, where we saw a large number of comrades being arrested and harassed by the police. Also, in the year 2000, we have seen the forceful eviction of a chief, Mkhuso, from a community called Matecheni in the Lubombo region, who was evicted and had to reside in the nearby South Africa. Where in that midst of action, the Prime Minister made a statement around the fact that the police should use every force possible to ensure peace and stability in the country. We have also seen the king coming out in 2008, declaring that activists and their supporters should be suffocated to ensure that the security forces restore order in the land. From there, we have seen the killings of comrades, Nokolo, Comrade Ngubane, and Comrade Siphochele, who all were killed by police, and also the torture, the arrest and torture of Comrade Musangubeni, Maxwell Dlamini, Peggy and Zonke, and also the harassment and torture of Comrade Wandile. The list is endless. So from those actions, comrades, informed by the political environment, the regime has institutionalized police brutality, and those responsible for torturing comrades and activists have been rewarded by promotions within the police force. But also we have seen that the undemocratic nature of the state is a breeding ground also for state security agents to behave in the manner in which they are doing now. And also we have seen that a lot of people have died in the hands of the police, and also some have been left with permanent scars. And all that responsible this that has taken place. Now coming into the COVID-19 situation and the lockdown regulations. As an update, currently we have 18,854 cases incrementally. As last today, we have seen the cases, new cases, about 81 new cases that Swaziland has recorded today, and we have 677 deaths that we have so far incrementally accumulated. And also recently we have seen a new rise in new infections. In the last 7 days, we have been averaging 20 cases per day. Scary in a small country like Swaziland of 1.2 million people. Vaccines have not been enough, and only 35,000 of our people have been vaccinated to date. And what we are seeing is that there has been 200 million rands that has been reserved for vaccines, but we have now been dependent on donations and foreign aid for vaccinations that are ongoing. And we have seen that there is an increase in non-compliance with procurement policies in the times of COVID-19, where we have seen connected elites benefiting from the procurement tenders that have been issued during this time. Also, we have seen funds that were raised for combating COVID-19, which were not accounted for by the Disaster Management Agency, and there's been no consequences for such. Also, in the implementation of the lockdown regulations, we have seen that countries like Eswatini have benefited a lot from this situation, because it gives the status quo the leeway to continue quashing dissent, but also limit movements of people within the country. But we have seen also the introduction of cyber crimes law, because of the fact that people now have turned to social media in the times of the COVID-19 lockdown to raise their issues in terms of governance. And then state security agents have applied the highest level of force in dispersing all protests that have been taking place. We have seen that in Swaziland has been engulfed by protest since April 2021, and in the period we have seen 12 youths arrested in the month of May and tortured by police. And in that process, we have also seen the rise of the campaign Justice for Taban, who is an activist student who was killed by police on the 11th of 8 and between the dates of 11th between the dates of 8th and 11th of May. And
so, Comrade Tabo,
yes.
if you could conclude. If you could conclude.
Okay, I'm concluding.
Thank you, Com.
Yeah, so the for Justice for Tabane campaign and the campaign for the release of Ayanda Dlamini, who has been arrested by the police, has been ongoing, and there's been petitioning of constituencies, MPs from all 59 constituencies in the land to try and put pressure on the government to actually democratize. Now the Justice for Taban campaign has taken a full swing to push for the government of Swaziland to democratize, to unban political parties, but also to ensure that the king gives back the powers to elect prime ministers and ministers, also the commissioners for key portfolios to be elected by the people. But also there's been a call to ensure that the police who killed Tabane are held accountable for their actions. So, but also, comrades, the inquest on the death of Tabane Gomonye is ongoing, and the Foundation for Socio-Economic Justice Facebook page is bringing it live through its Facebook page for everyone to be able to follow what is happening. But also, in conclusion, the mass democratic movement in Swaziland is calling for solidarity with the people of Swaziland in ensuring that the regime is held accountable for its actions and is actually put under pressure to democratize, to unban political parties, and to ensure that all political exiles return back to Swaziland without any conditions. Thank you, comrades, for the time. Over to you, Comrade Joy.
Thank you so much, Comrade Tabo. Very powerful input as always, and the call for regional solidarity is quite clear. The need to have space opened up for civic activism, political parties activism, and all the needs that all these things that must push ahead democratic ethos is quite clear. And of course, the biggest issue there being around police brutality during COVID-19. So thanks for that. Comrades, we are almost there. Just two things left for us to do. The first one, which we are moving to immediately, is on South Africa. And then the last one would be how we pull the pieces together, and we'll do that in about 5 or so minutes. So with your indulgence, I see participation and continued participation has remained, and I really would love to thank you for that. The numbers have remained high. We are just left with a few more minutes to conclude. Now, as we move towards conclusion, South Africa has been a center for activism. South Africa has been, so many things do happen in South Africa, and quite a good number of us from the region do find ourselves in South Africa one way or the other. And South Africa has become so key in terms of pushing for solidarity at many levels, be it at political parties level, be it at the government level, be it even at people-to-people level. You know, the trade union movement, the churches, and many of the South African society have really been involved in the search for solidarity. Now, the question that we really have is the role of South Africa around enhancing regional solidarity. Do you find the current fractures within the ruling party, the ANC, is weakening in terms of influencing the regional integration, development, and stability? And in your view, is the new South African, what is really the new South African diplomacy on hotspot areas in Southern Africa? And none other than Comrade Venetia Gavenda will take us through that. Comrade Gavenda works with so many civil society organizations, a good friend of so many of the countries in the regions, including but not limited to Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Lesotho, and many others. And today also comes wearing the hat that she works with the Zimbabwe Solidarity Forum, but quite an influential individual in South Africa, in South African politics. So over to you, Comrade V.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone. I'm very privileged to be here today. I see quite a number of people that I haven't seen in a very long time. I'm so glad to see you all well. You know, today is probably one of the worst days as regards the COVID figures in South Africa. It's higher than it's been during the second wave, and today we had about 8,000 positive cases. So as I'm sure all of you know, the situation has become quite dire, quite drastic. I think South Africa suffers many of the same issues that the rest of our comrades across the region have echoed. I'm sure all of you have been watching the recent Zondo Commission and some of the work that has been done by our investigative journalists in the country. So, you know, the one thing that the COVID, it's not responsible for, but it certainly exposed all of the fissures and all of the fault lines in South Africa. And
I'm not so sure if it's me alone who has lost you, Comrade V.
I've lost her too.
Okay.
Me too, I've lost her. I don't
It looks like we have lost Comrade Venetia. I do hope she will be able to reconnect. Let's just be patient for a few more seconds whilst the team try and get hold of her to let her know we've lost her. If you can hear me, Comrade Venetia, you can unmute and proceed. Thanks. We had lost you for a couple of
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Yes. So, you know, the COVID really unpacked for us, and it was a reality check, and it is a reality check. Our societies are extremely vulnerable, and it's not just about our future. It's about the immediate survival. South Africa has had the highest number of malnutrition rates amongst children than we've had in the last 50 years. So this impact has rattled all of our cages. Our comfort zones have been removed from safety, security, our own dignity, the job losses and the job shedding, as you've all know, can see 74% youth unemployment in the country and growing. We still, unlike Namibia, have been unable to even put in place a campaign around the basic income grant. I'm hoping that this COVID pandemic is actually going to start igniting some of that, catalyzing some of that, the kinds of remedies where the majority of our people require, they need an assistance. So I think for us in forums like this, we need to remember that extractivism is not only about the natural resources under the ground. It's very much in a South African context about what is above the ground, our agriculture. Extractivism is rife in our agricultural sector, and that directly impacts on our food security in the country, which in turn will impact on all of you who depend on imports of food from South Africa. So as we speak today as well, the ANC is extremely embattled, both on the internal and on the outside. We have rising unemployment, we have rising COVID, our hospitals, our health sector has all but crumbled. Our state can't manage the crisis at the moment and is going from one day to the next. As we speak today, the General Secretary of the ANC is in court challenging his suspension on fraud charges previously. So, you know, as we talked about the intra-party conflict, and this is not just about the kind of conflict that is required in a democracy, it's become very divisive. It's become extremely combative and very, very destructive in the country. That instead of really focusing on key issues about what's happening around us, we now focused on the kind of internal party issues. And I think for us in South Africa and for the whole region, the confluence and the incumbency, you know, over the last decade, every single one of the liberation movements in the region has come back into power or is in power. And there's been a change of leadership all around, younger leadership, and each one of the countries in the region that came into power again over this decade, they promised huge amounts of attention on corruption, on the state capture, on the misuse of public funds, all of them. So whether they can deliver on that as liberation movements, I don't know. And I think that's what we need to be looking at. And that's what we need to be understanding, where civil society and our solidarity movements fall in within that kind of paradigm. However, as much as the liberation movements and the ANC in particular in this case is losing its ground in terms of legitimacy, in terms of trust, so too are all the opposition parties. So too is civil society. So there's no sector that is really beginning to like really keep its space and be able to posit a more cohesive and coordinated kind of challenge to any one of our governments. Even at a regional level, the civil society platform is not functioning at the moment. So as much as, you know, the liberation movements are incredibly weak, we have been unable to pull together and to provide a kind of challenge that could leverage off that weakness. I want to now maybe round up a lot more and say that, you know, South Africa has come under huge scrutiny, and that is because a lot of it is about the media and the investigative media in particular. We've seen how the confluence between the state and the political elite and then business. So power is also reconfigured in that it's not just the state and it's not just the ruling party elite that have in some way or the other managed to entangle themselves in the resources. Business and private sector is in it, but our focus hasn't been consolidated enough around private sector. And I think moving forward, we need to have as much focus on the private sector as we have on our governments, who at this stage are merely rent-seeking when it comes to capital and not making the most out of the kind of resources that could take the region, if not all of our countries, out of the kind of quagmire it is in at the moment. So this distinction has always blurred the lines, but I think we need to become a lot clearer in how we see where the various issues rise and how power has changed and shifted, and therefore what we ought to be looking at. I hope for the next platform that we have, we are able to bring some of the farmers who are doing a very phenomenal job under very trying circumstances in our region. I hope for us to bring some of the miners who have been declared in South Africa essential workers. And you wonder, what value do we place on our mine workers? So that these platforms such as this, we begin to put the voices directly of the most vulnerable communities in our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade V. You know, the last point you make is a very, very powerful point. You know how we also begin to bring in those that cannot ordinarily be in these spaces so that their voice is also heard. Is a very, very powerful point. And I'm sure Comrade Vava and the leadership of the coalition here have heard and have taken note of this very powerful point. use of this platform to extend to others that cannot ordinarily be heard. And you also really make very fundamental points about how the liberation movements are seemingly also losing grip and are no longer that much trusted, and how we need to leverage on that and rebuild momentum. That is people's own momentum, people's own movements, people's own initiatives towards a region that we think we would all love to live in. And of course, the shift in power that we need to always keep an eye on. And that really always informs us in terms of who it is we need to target, who it is we need to work with. So thanks so much, Comrade V, for that powerful input. Comrades and friends, before we conclude, please allow me to open up for a quick round of, I wouldn't say really questions. What I'm looking for from you now is, you have heard, now that we have heard, I know you would really have loved to hear more from the presenters clarifying issues and all, but because of time, we can't do that. If I can have a few inputs from you, comrades, now that we've heard about the state of the region, imagine almost 12 inputs from SADC, representatives from SADC or Southern African countries, with common things, with things that really run in the same direction, but all pointing to the need to rebuild, reboot, reboost, you know, the solidarity movement, the people's movements. What do you think we must do in the very near future under these circumstances to keep the movement running? I see a hand there, and I may have to scroll a little bit to see whose hand it is. Okay, it's Tembelitle's hand. I recognize you. Who else would want to make an input? Please show by raising your hand. If you fail to raise your hand, we can try other methods. Meanwhile, Comrade Tembelitle, in less than 30 seconds or so, kindly make your point.
Thank you, Comrade Kule. My contribution will go to the DRC of Congo. Maybe if the civil society in Congo can really investigate into the chief causes of the country's conflict, other than venturing into the electoral conflict, because the long-standing conflict, you know, it's, I think, on politics and resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade. Point well taken and well noted. Any other contributions from the floor? The floor is yours. Let's just do about 5 minutes. Let's hear your voices. It's been quite a mouthful you heard from colleagues, and I know you've been digesting, and it leaves you, of course, with some degree of hope even under the circumstances. We must remain hopeful. Any other inputs, colleagues? Let me hear somebody from any of the other countries in the region. What must we do? And of course, the organizers from Crisis, before I hand over to the spokesperson for the conclusion and of course closing remarks, organizers from Crisis, do feel free to also chip in and direct the conversations. Yes, Comrade Pauline, please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you, Joy. Mine is, you know, it's good to meet around the SADC summit, but what is also important for us as regional civil society activists is to really move away from just meeting around this summit, but find a way that would enable us to consistently monitor and also share information, and by so doing, be able to intervene and help each other to intervene in issues that we think are of regional and national importance. I mean, we always lost momentum after this summit, and that is working against us. So I want us to look into that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Pauline. a powerful point, and is just also to let you know that the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition is also part of the Southern Africa Southern Africa People Solidarity Network, which also convenes social movements around the SADC summit, and it's coming again in August. But yeah, just to say the space has become more lively. And just yesterday, also the SAPSIN and ZIMCOD and other colleagues, including also Crisis, did another convening on the sidelines of the extraordinary summit. And this is a very, very strong point that you make here, that let's keep this space lively. Let's have lively solidarity, and let's not wait for summits, which is also part of the reason why this meeting is being held outside the August summit itself, and just also building momentum towards the summit. So it's a very good point there. Colleagues, comrades and friends, it does appear to me that we have had a very good discussion, and we have had the opportunity to take stock of the state of democracy, governance, electoral reforms, extractivism in the region, and they are running themes that are so common. We will not be able to give a summary to what we have discussed here that will be contained in a report to be shared. But it appears clear to me, as I suspect it also appears to you, that some of the things that we are taking away here is that the first one is that the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the social, economic, and political crisis within SADC member states, while leading to the escalation of rights violations. And this is a call for civil society to act. We must really defend that space and ensure that we do not continue to have our rights violated in the different countries that we are from, and we need to build solidarity around that. The second one is corruption and poor governance within the extractive industry in SADC states has led to SADC states failing to realize benefits from our natural resources. So there is an imperative need for civil society within the region to organize, continue to organize and demand for good governance within the extractive sector. There must be corporate accountability, and there must also be a continued look at the laws governing the extractive sector, so that we also continue to benefit from our resources. Nothing could be telling than what we heard from Namibia, especially, and of course backed up by what we got from our colleagues, from Mozambique. The other point that I wish to stress here is that the lack of electoral reforms has largely worked against free and fair elections in most SADC states, and this has perpetuated authoritarianism. And again, there is a call for civil society to act in ensuring that elections within the region are held in accordance with international best practices. And we stress here that we have realized that COVID-19 is with us and will continue to be with us. But that does not necessarily mean that citizens must not participate. That does not necessarily mean that COVID-19 can be used as an instrument to disenfranchise SADC citizens. So we need to keep an active and very clear eye on electoral reforms and the need to ensure that we adjust accordingly, so that we do not continue to see citizens being, or rather, citizens being disenfranchised in the name of COVID-19. So these are some of the things that seem to have been commonly running as a theme within our conversations. And that said, comrades and friends, recognizing that the time is flying and we no longer have much time on our hands, let me take this opportunity to thank you for your active participation, and promise you on behalf of the organizers that we will continue with these engagements, and we will use as much as we can this information to keep building people-to-people solidarity, reaching out to each other, acting together, defending what remains of the democratic space that we exist in, and ensuring that states are accountable as well as the corporates that they seem to so much love to work with. That said, comrades and friends, I do think that my role as facilitator for this conversation has come to an end, and it is a perfect moment and opportunity to hand back over to the overall organizers of this regional dialogue. And to do so, let me hand over back to Comrade Blessing Vava, who will facilitate the arrangement on closing remarks. So back over to you, Comrade Vava, and thank you so much to comrades and friends for the active participation.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Joy, for handling today's event very well. The discussions were illuminating and they were very much captivating and very insightful. Without wasting much of your time, allow me to invite the spokesperson of the coalition, Comrade Kumalo, to give us the vote of thanks. Then we can close. Over to you, Comrade.
Thank you so much, Comrade Bava, and all the colleagues. Let me say, on behalf of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition Tariet, was very successful, and the required leaders, so that as civil society, we continue to push for a coordinated people-to-people solidarity at a regional level. Special thanks goes to Comrade Joy Mabenge, who was our anchorman, the conference facilitator. Thank you, Comrade Joy, for a job well done. The different presenters that we had from various stations across the SADC region and all the participants, thank you so much. We realize that our region is indeed under siege from some unscrupulous political and business players who are after profiteering. And if we lack providing leadership as civil society, then these unscrupulous political and business players will run away and destroy our region. So without wasting much of your time, thank you so much, colleagues, and thank you to the Secretariat for the coordination and organizing such a fruitful event. Thank you so much. Back to you, Comrade Vava. Comrade Vava, are you there?
Okay, comrades, thank you. Thank you, Comrade Spokesperson, for the closing remarks, and thank you, colleagues. We shall share the communique, and all those who want the presentations, the papers that were presented today, feel free to drop us an email at publications@crisiszimbabwe.org, publications@crisiszimbabwe.org, or at info@crisiszimbabwe.org. And you also find the presentations on our website, that is www.crisiszim.org. But also to inform that we are going to have a post-conference publication of all the presentations that we've made, that were done today. We're going to consolidate them into one solid publication that will also print and also share, as a software, as soft copies as well. So, colleagues, thank you very much for attending this meeting, and we should continue with this kind of interactions as Africans in Southern Africa, and to make sure that people solidarity remains one of the things that we should do in our quest to in the fight for democracy, in the fight for peace, and in the fight for good governance in Southern Africa. So, colleagues, I wish you a good day, and the meeting is ended. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, bye.
Well, thank you, Minier.